Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
So last year, when I did my mission moment, I talked to you and gave you a big thank you for the 10 years that you'd been supporting my project in Kenya. This year, with an initial brief review of what we talked about next year, I'm going to tell you where we're headed. And it is coalescing and coming together, and it's bigger than I ever imagined. And it's incredibly exciting, so I'm really eager to share this with you. Next slide. So this is the building we're currently in. It was originally supposed to be a chicken coop, the fanciest chicken coop in the continent of Africa. But it now houses our factory. Next slide, where last year I showed our new packaging machine, which hasn't been the boon to our production that I thought it would be. It has been a constant headache, and I think with the path going forward, we may not need this machine. Next slide. So here's what I basically told you last year. We started in 2013. Our first jar was produced in 2014. In 2022, we moved into the new factory, and we're currently producing about 2 to 3 metric tons a year, which treats anywhere from 150 to 200 children. The jars on the top are what we started with. The automatic packager, the silver slides are showing what that automatic packaging looks like. Next slide. And since we've started, we've treated over 1,000 children.
Wow.
And if we just continued to do that, that would be enough. It would be okay. It's not about the numbers, but we have bigger ideas because there's a bigger need. Next slide. So this slide's a little bit complicated. I'll take you through it. The top line, there's about 50,000 metric tons of the same product that we make that are produced by about 22 major manufacturers worldwide. USAID, that big pie circle on the left, and World Health Organization, they purchase about 85% of that production, and they send it to areas of humanitarian need. These are areas like Palestine currently, Darfur years ago, Afghanistan, places like that, where they end up treating about 28% of the kids who actually need this, which is 3.8 million children. That's a huge amount, right? But they're only reaching a quarter of the children who need it. That other 15% only gets 7,500 metric tons, and that represents almost 10 million children. So what are we going to do about that? Next slide. That leaves a shortfall of about 121,000 metric tons worldwide. Next slide. But if you look at the loss along the supply chain, the estimated treatment that USAID and World Health Organization use in their statistics, which is about a third of what it should be to guarantee that a child will not regress and need to enter a program again. And the total shortfall estimate worldwide is, next slide, 250,000 metric tons. So the Gates Foundation and UNICEF threw $1 billion at this a year or so ago. And they said, okay, you 22 big guys, let's churn out a whole bunch of more stuff and we'll get it there. Didn't work. Didn't change the supply chain dynamics. They didn't pay them up front, so they couldn't afford the raw materials to produce more product. So we ended up, after $1 billion, still having a 200,000 metric ton shortfall. And it's still not getting to the 72%. Next slide. So again, those are 10 million children that look like these kids. Next slide. So a very famous philosopher, me, has 2 quotes I like to use. The inability to reach 10 million malnourished children with life-saving treatment is a failure of will and ideas. And if McDonald's can put a franchise in every county to create obesity, why can't we place a factory in every county to feed the starving? Next slide. The original guy who developed this product is from Washington University, Mark Maneri, who I believe should be a Nobel Prize candidate. He has saved millions of lives with this recipe. His original paper, however, stressed the need for local production because it provides employment, support for farmers, you create goodwill in the community, and you create trust. And in addition to that, you get less loss along the supply chain, you get less layers of bureaucracy, and you really create a community effort to feed the most vulnerable within that community. And that's beautiful in itself, but it's also a huge cost savings. Next slide. So here's our plan. It's bold. I'm pitching it to everybody that'll listen to me. I was at the National Convention of the Ladies of Charity that was in St. Louis last week talking about this. We believe that a processing plant in our location right now that would increase our production to 100 metric tons a year, that's enough to treat 2 or 3 counties, would cost about $250,000. At that convention last week, I was approached by somebody who may have access to that money, and just this week, I got a response from USAID that they are now reviewing my grant application. So prayers for those, amen, please. We can fund the labor costs through donations, and in fact, we have a golf tournament on the 27th of September. If anybody wants to play golf at Peevely Farms, see me in coffee hour afterwards. It's going to be a great day. The key is negotiating with local governments and suppliers to cover the cost of the raw materials, because if they can do that, we can supply a product that undercuts the wholesale costs that they're currently buying it for. Next slide. So the amount of money, if we purchase three of the raw materials that we use are produced in Homa Bay County, and we're hiring people from there, we're going to be putting over $100,000 into the local economy. They only spend close to $300,000 a year on their ready-to-use therapeutic food. So we believe it's an economic boon for the county to contract locally. Next slide. And what are the longer-term benefits for the county? Healthier people, less school days lost, less work days lost, less health care costs as you get along the way, a stronger, smarter workforce, and then the money that you have goes to other things, and you're able to distribute it better. So what are the barriers? I call this the windmill of Don Quixote. Funding, which I think we're maybe getting close to, the corruption that's within the local and federal governments, and even the international big boys, which I call on the bottom pie TPTB, the powers that be. So these are the windmills we're fighting against, but I believe we have a solution, not just for Homa Bay County, but for that 9.8 million kids. Next slide. Imagine 2,000 local producers who are producing what we anticipate we can produce, 100 metric tons a year. That equals that shortfall, 200,000 metric tons a year that we talked about. 2,000 factories, those factories, if they each cost $250,000, that would cost half of what the Gates Foundation threw at the problem last year. We just need to think about it differently, and we need to convince people that it will work. So I view our project now as a pilot project. If we can prove that this works in Homa Bay County, we can send this worldwide. And that's my story. Thank you.
Marty, before you leave, so we know that the OKS Peanut Butter Project is really important, and we're going to touch upon something at the end of worship. What I would love for you to do right now, knowing how important this is take a deep breath in, Look out to the congregation and simply tell them from your heart, why should we give to the OKS Peanut Butter Project?
Because you don't know which one of those children we touch might be the next Nelson Mandela.